How do you shuck an oyster?
Put the knife in the hinge, man, pry the shells open, put my fingers in between it.
Take the whole knife across the top of the shell.
I look at it first to see where I want to get into that spot.
I'll come into the side of the oyster.
Just like picking a lock.
They kind of twist like that.
Spinning it around in my hand and cutting that adductor to the other side.
Open it, cut it.
It'll cleanly cut the top shell.
And pop it open.
I'm spinning and lift the top.
Just like that.
Like the perfect oyster, after you open it, you could almost tip it upside down and it won't come out.
The best oyster is like the one that doesn't think it's even been opened yet.
A good oyster is a sold oyster.
My favorite oyster is the one in my mouth.
Oyster openers are the rock stars of the shellfish industry.
So if there's only one thing I could do all day long, would be to constantly shuck oysters.
Cut, you Dr. Mouthful, throw it.
I think that's the fastest way to shuck an oyster.
Like doing magic tricks.
Keeping it on the table, popping it, spinning it, cutting it.
That's what I do. I open oysters.
The oyster is a celebrity. We're just, a messenger.
This is the Garde Manger. This is my restaurant. I own it with two of my friends, and we opened it about 6 years ago. And we serve seafood here. We serve oysters. I never wanted to be an oyster shucker. I was a bartender before, and my partner, Chuck Hughes, taught me the importance of a clean oyster and a fresh oyster and how to present oysters, and how beautiful a raw bar and a platter could be.
I mean, in the perfect world, that's all I would do with my whole life, is just shuck oysters. Why do I like them so much? I don't know. Who cares? You know what I mean? It's really just about eating them for me.
And we started selling them. We kind of got famous for them, for having great platters. And that's about all I thought about it. It was work, I loved it, and it was important for me to make a beautiful platter, but I didn't think about it the way I started hearing other people talk about it.
Are they good?
They're amazing. I hated oysters until just now. I hated oysters.
Come on.
I was very scared about this one, but I ate my share and it was amazing.
Go to a party, what am I bringing? A case of oysters. There's 10 people that love them, 5 people that have never had them, 1 girl that's allergic, 2 other people that have like the story, oh my God, don't get me started on oysters.
Over the past 6 years, it's just gone up and up and up. Everybody's ordering oysters. Like everybody's gone oyster crazy. I mean, people come here and they have their first oyster here. It's a big experience. So I got curious, I got curious to know what's out there about oysters that I don't know. But my interest in oysters didn't peak until there was this guy, Daniel Notkin. Daniel Notkin Oysters. Daniel Notkin, the guru of oysters.
My name is Daniel Notkin. I'm a humble little oyster shucker.
What is it about oysters?
I was general manager of a restaurant, and then I left for a couple of years, and they asked me to come back, and one of the stipulations was to open this raw bar. I took it upon myself to learn everything about oysters.
Daniel is ingrained in Montreal's oyster community. He brokers oysters for many seafood restaurants and caters parties. For Daniel, it's all oysters, all the time.
The oysters filter water, but they don't filter water from dirt or pollution. They die from that. Oysters just filter phytoplankton and algae. And what happens is if these oysters are not there to eat this algae and phytoplankton, then the water clouds up. And if the water clouds up, there's no light that comes down. And if there's no light that comes down, the seagrass that holds all this sand and all this little eco community doesn't have a chance to grow. If the seagrass doesn't grow, the little fish don't come in. If the little fish don't come in, the bigger fish don't come in. These are the linchpin of the ocean.
I'm fascinated. I'll listen to you forever. Daniel offered to serve me some of his finest and explain a little more.
Let me tell you a little bit about what you have today if you are so inclined and interested. In the front, we're gonna have beautiful Cape Spears from New Brunswick. They're gonna be a beautiful, round, soft salt right off the start, but it's saltier this time of year, and especially this year, there's not so much rain coming down, so the ocean water encroaches a little bit more, making it a little bit more salty. You're gonna have a little light, thin butteriness through the mid to end palate and a light little chicken stock characteristic of Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick oysters. You have lemons and limes, fresh grated horseradish, and the mignonette is made with finely diced shallots and champagne vinegar, and I think you're set to go.
Most of what he was saying kind of confused me, but I gotta admit, the guy knows his oysters. Every year, Daniel puts on a festival to celebrate the oyster and raise awareness for their environment.
Why am I doing this? Should I have my head examined?
He gets the whole city out for the event. And at the center of everything,
Delicious.
oysters.
There was something about the oyster more than anything else almost in the world that I've ever seen. You don't remember your first piece of chocolate. You don't remember your first steak. Let me tell you, most of us remember our first oyster. There's something about this little guy. And when you start on oysters, you enter this whole world.
Blue-collar food gone bourgeois.
I never in a million years would think this many people would come out and go crazy for an oyster festival. So I helped Daniel out by shucking some oysters, nearly killing myself in the process. The craziest part was when he announced the oyster shucking contest.
Who is ready for the oyster shucking competition?
The whole thing seemed kind of like a big deal, and everyone seemed to be taking it very seriously.
2, 3, shuck!
And I wondered if there were more to these festivals and competitions out there.
Shuck, shuck, shuck.
And what drove people to flock to them? I knew Daniel would have the answer. The more Daniel told me about festivals, the more I realized he had only given me the tip of the oyster iceberg.
Right now we are going to Charlottetown, PEI.
I set out on the road with him to discover what goes on at oyster festivals and dive into the world of professional oyster shucking competitions. So we're going to my first official oyster shucking competition. So I'm gonna shuck. Is there gonna be like big timers? Like, give me names.
Well, so we have Eamon Clark, 2 or 3-time Canadian champion.
First time I ever won, I beat my dad's Canadian record by 1 second.
If you're competing, you're playing up against everybody else. If you're opening oysters, you're playing up against the oysters.
If you can say you're the best at something, it's fun, you know what I mean? And I take pride in that, so that's why I enjoy doing it.
This guy's I'm gonna be shucking against the Canadian champion, and I mean, that's not fair.
And then you have Patrick McMurray, if he's going to be there.
We'll start from the local, we'll go up. So we'll go 5-time Ontario champion, 4-time Canadian champion, won the Worlds in 2002, twice fastest, twice third, twice fifth at the Worlds. Guinness Book of World Records with 33 oysters in a minute, and just recently broke it in May in China, doing 38 oysters in a minute. There's a few more, but it gets boring after that.
It's just the speed competition, or it's just the nicest oyster?
No,
like,
you
how
have to
does
do
it work?
speed and beauty. So you're going to have you have the oyster.
Yeah.
And so when you shuck a perfect oyster, right, it's going to look exactly as it was in the shell 3 seconds earlier. When you're sitting down there, it's just you. It's how quickly and how beautifully you can shuck. That's it. That's all. I know it's dopey, but it's addictive.
Shucking competitions have long lists of rules with time penalties for each infraction. 3 seconds added if there's grit in the oyster. A pierce in the belly is another 3 seconds. 3 seconds for not cutting the oyster from the bottom of a shell. And a minute penalty for a missing oyster. And finally, a disqualification if there's blood in the oyster, which worried me the most. As I watched Daniel go through his preparations, I started to wonder, how seriously do these guys take opening oysters? High Valley Oyster Festival.
We made it all the way. Hi guys, where do Shuckers sign up? Right through there?
Yes, just go
Thanks very much.
The first thing I hear as I walk in, each shucker was being announced like a heavyweight fighter.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Canadian Oyster Shucking Championship here in High Valley, Prince Edward Island. We have 30 of the best oyster shuckers competing tonight to become the Canadian Oyster Shucking Champion. Oyster Shucking
And it was like this at every festival we went to across the country.
Folks, we've got the best oyster shuckers performing for you right here.
Oyster Opening Championships. We're here to celebrate competitive oyster opening.
My name is John Bil, and I'm an itinerant restaurant opener and oyster shucker. First time I went to PEI was the year before I actually moved to PEI for the summer, and I finished second. I didn't really think I was any good, and all of a sudden I'm like second in Canada the first year I show up, right? And this is like, that's 20 years ago now, or 21 years ago, right? I did it like from 1992 to 2005. You know how many things I won? I don't know, a lot. How do you become the fastest oyster shucker in Canada each year? Well, you shuck a lot of oysters.
Each contestant gets a bag of 21 oysters. From that bag, they are to open 18. No more, no less. I have a knife. I have no knife. I have no knife.
Everybody's got their own knife. All you need is a simple knife. It's not about anything in particular. It's just what you get comfortable with. That's the knife. But I swear, this knife is taking me to some of the craziest places in the world.
Whatever, it's not the knife, man. You want me to open an oyster with a butter knife? I'll open it with a butter knife. I mean, it's like fine. Any knife will do, man. You give the best oyster shucker in the world, the shittiest knife in the world, he's still gonna be the best oyster shucker in the world.
So basically, I'm redoing my knives for the competition and to try out some new styles today before the competition tomorrow. See, so already you see how
Oh, shit. It's like a sword now.
Yeah.
What's that big fat knife right there?
This one? This is a stainless steel one, and then I just remade to be like that.
You cut this into, why do you curve it and cut it into
Because
that?
so that little bit of shell, so I can get in a little bit deeper with the shell doesn't hit the side of it. All right. Okay, careful. It's really sharp. Just feel it. I'm not done yet.
Ooh, it's hot.
Yeah, just give it a flick with your finger.
I don't know if I want it too sharp.
You can dull it afterward. So what you do is you sharp, and when you dull it, you take your board like that, and you can dull it as much as you want.
When's the last time someone cut themselves during an oyster competition?
I cut myself in my competition. That's good for you for now?
Yeah, it's good. Daniel might know a thing or two about knives, but he's still considered a novice in competition, having only competed in a few of them.
The stress is enormous. I think I care about things too much. So when you're there, that the heart palpitations, the stress for the day, it takes minutes off my life.
Our next contestant from Montreal, Quebec, Montreal, pork fishing company, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together.
When you are there with just your knife and your oyster, and you are the last of these sort of dragon slayers, you are besting yourself against this, and that's sort of you want to best it and you want to do it justice. I just want to know what's inside. I want to know what's inside each one.
We're going to count down from 10. Canadian Oyster Shucking Championship.
Come on already. Come on, top 10.
If I had any doubt that Shuckers took competition seriously, that doubt was shattered as I watched Daniel agonize over his final placement.
In fourth position, with a total time of 2 minutes and 54 seconds, Daniel Notkin.
At the PEI Shellfish Festival, I was ready to make my competition debut.
In Montreal, Quebec, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and welcome Tim Rozon.
There I was, on stage like a deer in headlights. I had no idea what to do with this box. I mean, thank God there were oysters in it. Then I nodded to an imaginary person in the audience, and before I knew it, we were about to start. So to look cool, I shot bullets in the air. I was not taking this nearly as seriously as the people around me, and once competition began, I fell behind really quickly. And by the end, there was an uncomfortable silence as I at least tried to finish my plate.
Come on, folks, keep it going for Tim. He's got one more to go. Come on, folks, let's make some noise out here.
How did it feel, your first competition?
I mean, it felt really weird. Like, I wasn't nervous and I was kind of excited, but then at the same time, it's like you get like caught up in like this weird kind of like momentum thing, but it's like I wanted to be faster than the guy next, just getting them out fast.
Same energy that you got to do it.
It was like so many little things I didn't think about, like I'm bleeding.
Nice.
A couple of cuts. Like the plate wasn't fucking big enough for all my oysters.
You have to be very careful. I'm terrible at that.
Like fuck, it just. I entered as many of these competitions as I could. Not hoping to become the world champion, but just so I could proudly call myself a shucker. Someone who truly understands and respects this beautiful little creature we all call an oyster.
These competitions are just one big party, you know. We do everything but throw televisions out the window. They're rock star competitions.
I was aggressively shucking and fashion first, and I ruined the fucking skirt. Jesus Christ.
My opinion of oyster shuckers is they should be somewhere between a god and a trial attorney. I love them, and they should be paid a lot of money.
I forgot one. The hot rod. No, I buried it in shells. Should have thrown them all. I was hitting people, so I stopped.
Oyster openers, we are completely, ridiculously passionate.
Want an oyster?
Thank you, sir.
So passionate about oysters that we would talk for 7 hours straight, nothing else but oysters.
They had a rough night. It's the king of raw foods, you know? Just a touch of vodka. And for me, it's like you get the saltiness, you find a sweetness to it, a brininess, and it's just amazing. If we were oysters, the world would be a better place.
For me, what I know is opening oysters in competition. I love it. It's fun. Anytime you can go in there and be humble, but also puff your chest out and say, bring it, that's fun. For me, it was always about competing with my dad. That's who, you know, just him and I. It was fun.
Why is that? Why do you think people are so attracted to it?
It's the only thing you eat alive and raw besides each other.
Know that I'm opening all the oysters that are consistently the exact same. They look the exact same. He's been the Canadian champion, I think, 3 times. So that's who got me into the whole competition.
Rodney is responsible for the reinvigoration of oysters across Canada.
Rodney's
really,
a guy?
Rodney is a guy. He's the godfather of oysters, I guess we could say.
How can you make somebody love you? You can't. You've got to show them what it is, and they have to love it. It's got shell cup, which means it holds meat. You chew, don't swallow, chew, and then you get the salt, and then you get sweet in your mouth as an after finish.
First oyster.
Yes, well, that's a very good oyster to have. They're black and white food. You're eating those? Oh, God. You know? Or, my God, what is that you're eating?
Rodney Clark, the oysterman. But he didn't start out that way. He started out as a graphic designer. On weekends, his father would send him an odd case or 2 of oysters from his home in PEI to shuck at private parties. Cut to 20 years later, and Rodney's has expanded from its humble little start to a small empire, with Rodney ever the showman.
You do have a mistress, and the mistress was the oyster house. This place would wrap its legs around me, and I just couldn't get out. You know, there's 63 of us now. It's not a mistress anymore. She's a madame.
Across town, I had the opportunity to meet one of Rodney's most colorful alumni, Adam Calhoun. The festivals are fucking fun.
Yeah,
There's
festivals
chicks
are
and
fun.
everybody's drunk and it's fun.
I was second in Canada 4 fucking times. Second.
Yeah. Oyster shucking competitions is a big part of the Canadian oyster tradition, for sure.
I laugh now at the guys that are all like, "Grr," but I was like that, 25 years ago. John knows.
Shucking contests bring people into the awareness of it's great. But that's just the...
I think they serve their purpose.
Yeah.
I never got in the business to become an oyster shucking champion or to get in the Guinness Book of World Records. I got in the business to have my own Guinness tap.
Adam got his start at Rodney's and hasn't looked back.
Oyster Boy was a manifestation of my frustration at people naming restaurants after themselves.
They hate me. I mean, Adam, Oyster Boy, would say, Rodney Clark, he's just ruining the industry for you boys. But the boys know what a good oyster is. Do they drink cheap rum? Not at the wedding of their daughter, they don't. They drink the good stuff. Everybody wants the good stuff. So, you should try and get the good stuff as best you can.
But the one thing they can agree on is their appreciation of oysters.
Well, when you think about it, it's probably one of the first live animals that humankind ever ate. Lots of minerals that go right to your testes. That is raw zinc is very good for your cum and your sperm production. And for a woman who loses all those minerals every month, it brings back those minerals right away into your bloodstream.
The meat should look like a large, I've said this on a number of occasions, a large breast in a small brassiere. You should go, whoa, look at that baby. And when you lift it up even to your eye, it should be puffed out, something that should be on some musical video.
We're still learning every day. I've been doing it for 28 years, 27 years now. There's a great quote from this French marine biologist. Oysters have sustained the poor and adorned the tables of the rich since the dawn of humanity, which is very true.
Oysters aren't new to this world. Oysters are prehistoric. They are 265 million years old. The first reports actually of farming oysters were from the Roman times, where there was a guy who was actually aquaculturing oysters. And they said of him that he was such a good aquaculturist that he could grow oysters on the roof of his house. If you go down to Maine, you will see by the river where the oysters grow, middens, what's called middens. And they are 6 foot, 8 foot high drifts of oyster shells. It's all the oyster shells that the Native Americans ate and just left sitting right there. There was a time where oysters were everywhere. And this was the birth of the oyster shucker as we know it commercially. This is where the real houses started, that they would hire people to shuck oysters all the time. They even hired children back then in the day. Kids would be taken out of school with little signs around their neck saying, "I am little Rosie, I can shuck 4 buckets a day." And between these oyster shuckers, this is the actual start of the shucking competition. Oysters were so popular that they thought it would be impossible to eat all of them. And then along came the advent of industry and steam engine and the train and dredging. And within 40 years, suddenly the oyster stocks were decimated. There were no more oysters. And the only way they could keep this industry alive was to start aquaculturing them, just like the Romans did 1,700 years earlier. It's this labor of love now. And when you make someone like an oyster, they'll never thank you enough.
The oyster takes its time to get to our plate, and oysters will be different from every single area, and the care and thought that goes into growing those is massive. In the most simplistic form, it's the most complicated thing to get done.
You know, these oysters are like wine. When you have wine, you call it terroir. When you have an oyster, you call it merroir. And if you could imagine that a wine changed every week, that would be an oyster.
I'm David Lewis, and I've been an oyster grower now since 1985.
My name's James Power, and I manage the Raspberry Point Oyster Company. We actually plant the oysters to grow them. So it's more of a farm than it actually is anything else.
Our oysters grow to market anywhere from 3 to 5 years. 3 years being a cocktail oyster, that's 2.5 inches, and 5 years being a large choice oyster, and that'd be 3.5 and above.
I just want to tell somebody someday, like when I'm old, like, what do you do? Well, I grow oysters. That's it. You know, I don't care if I have no money. I'm just going to go back and fish oysters. And if somebody buys them, great. And if somebody doesn't, great. I don't care. All I'm doing is paying my mortgage and PEI so that I can just sell my house and buy an oyster farm and lose all the money again and die. That's all I'm trying to do.
Are we shucking all these? Yeah. There you go. That's how an Alabama champ does it. Louisiana, Florida, Alabama champ, is that right? Yeah, you got it. There you go.
Shucking thousands of oysters a day for 25 years has not only primed Robert Daffin for competition, but has made him deeply aware of the oyster and its importance.
You know, it was just anything I said, hey, I think I'm gonna be an oyster shucker. It's just something I kind of fell into. I started learning more than that they were more than just an oyster, just, you know, a muddy thing that I was shucking to serve to somebody.
And the person who taught him everything he knows? Mama.
Snort the salt, shoot the tequila, and squeeze the limes in your eyes. You know, they're one of the biggest filter systems in our water. You've got the fresh water that blows out over the top of the oysters, and then you've got the salt water that comes back in over the top of them. So they get this kind of washing treatment every time the tide comes in and goes out.
Without oysters, the bays and the estuaries wouldn't be able to thrive, and that's where all our seafood comes from.
You can imagine taking the coffee filter out of your coffee pot and what your coffee would taste like. It's kind of like taking the oysters out of the water. You can kind of imagine that it's going to damage the water to some degree.
One of the first things I think draws people to oysters is the mystique of them, you know, and then of course, you know, the aphrodisiacal qualities of them.
One of the neat things about oysters is if there's not enough girl oysters, then the boy oysters turn into girls. And if there's not enough boy oysters, the girl oysters turn into boys. And they can do that several times in their lifetime. You kind of go, yeah, there's a reason for them being here, besides the fact that they taste good.
And that was it for me. I had to go to an oyster farm. But Daniel insisted we make a quick pit stop.
I'm taking you to this is my favorite place on earth. This is my heaven of heavens. There's, I don't know if there's a better place on earth. I used to spend my summers down in Gloucester, Massachusetts. I was fascinated by the ocean. I did not eat my first oyster until I was about 29. And that was at the place that my sister was shucking at. And she since doesn't do it anymore, but she's the only woman to ever win the Ontario Oyster Shucking Championship.
Daniel was 4 or 5 years old, standing in the ocean, fascinated with crabs and lobsters and clams and starfish, and there's a whole, you know, Galapagos island of shellfish that would come home from the beach every day. And maybe it got me more interested in seafood, and then I took it to another level and I sort of handed it back to him. So I could be owning a lobster farm any day now.
It's like being a kid.
You were sitting there as like, what, a 6-year-old kid?
Yeah.
Now you're sitting here as a grown man. You've been all over the world because of a freaking little oyster knife, opening oysters.
I've always said he gets people who would never be interested in oysters, eating oysters. It's like the impossible.
I don't know, there's just no words. I can describe, you know, I could stand out here and describe 1,000 oysters and I could describe everything, and I just standing out here, I don't know, I think it just describes itself.
So oysters don't grow here. We need an estuary, which is, correct me if I'm wrong from what I've learned, where salt water meets fresh water.
Correct.
This is the ocean.
This is the ocean.
I'm smart enough to know.
Correct.
I do not think oysters grow here.
You are very correct.
Around here, can you take me and show me how oysters are grown or where they grow?
Next stop is going to be going to see a friend of mine, William Chopper Young, who's not only one of the great oyster shuckers in history, and fast.
Oyster shucker named Chopper.
William Chopper Young.
Oysters are unique. They've been a special part in my life and so many others too. Not only catching them and growing them and all that and shucking them and all the big family of shuckers and everything that's all about the oyster and the oyster bars that's popping up. They're really, I've said 5 or 6 years ago, the oyster is waking up, you know. There's been oyster bars popping up everywhere. People are getting very educated about oysters and eating oysters from different areas, and it's really a great thing.
Chopper used gloves, so why the hell am I not using gloves?
I wouldn't shuck oysters without them unless I want to cut my hand.
If you were using oyster gloves, I'm using a glove. And I'm not gonna care what anybody in the world says about, you use a glove, I'm gonna say, yeah, Chopper Young told me to use gloves. Who's gonna say shit to me after that? I'm not cool anymore? Not gonna get fresher than that, brother.
No.
I'd love to know how you go in the hinge.
Yeah, right there, but you're gonna choke up on that. I put your thumb up there if I were you.
Other side though, no? Yeah.
No, he's good. Steady, just wiggle. Just wiggle till you feel it going.
It's in, holy fuck, it's in there.
Okay. Now that it's in, wiggle and push forward. Keep your thumb up forward though. Yep, right there. Now cut that muscle.
Towards you.
Just straight whack, whack. Now flip the top shell off. Well, you flip from down here. Look at that. It's perfect. He's happy. To farm them, I find it very, very, very fun. You know, to raise something from so small to grow into a product. You know, there's just something magical about growing oysters. I could never see myself not growing them again. Look at the baby oysters growing on them. Yep. Well, that one was on the bottom. That's a better one. I'll show you a bunch of those kind over there. When they spawn, the eggs swim in the water, get fertilized by the male oysters or whatever. And when they actually land on any hard surface, that egg sticks to that and starts forming a shell. And it adheres to whatever it's sitting on. And from there on, it's a baby oyster. The oyster, as we know it, the shell, will start to grow from that.
When it first sets on, it's gonna set like a little dot. Then what it does is it's gonna make its little top shell, and it makes its top shell. Then what it does is, then it starts to push out a bottom shell. And always every year, correct me if I'm wrong, it pushes out the bottom shell first, then it's gonna push this top shell and grow this top shell out to meet that. Then it's gonna grow out the bottom shell, then push out the top shell, and grow out the bottom.
I like it when they go at the same time. That hole feels like 1,200 bags there or so. What we do is load the truck with the bag, take the bags off the racks, cut them off, load them up, bring them home, wash them, cull them, sort them, box them, bring them to market. If you leave that there for 6 months or a year, like middle of next summer would be something like that, and the following year it'd be like that.
Right.
And then, yeah, that's a third-year oyster at least right there. So this is the oysters you like over here.
It's a great fucking oyster.
I've done well with it. I'm glad I took that route, really. I've got a good life, you know, happy growing oysters, shucking here and there. It's been good.
I mean, how much fresher can I get to eat an oyster than this ever? This is it.
This
right
is the
now.
highlight.
This is the
This
best.
is almost life highlight. I'm gonna retire after this.
This is highlight by the headlight.
Highlight by the headlight. Headlight oyster shucking.
Eat one of these. Definitely. Change your life.
Storm met us on the way, and on the way we go, and on the way we go.
While Massachusetts may be thriving with oysters, close by New York State isn't faring as well.
In 1913, New York City and the metropolitan area was really a mecca of oysters. They had them on Staten Island, they had them all over Long Island Sound, in Jersey, everywhere, even in the Hudson River. From colonial times on, the oysters impacted the economy of New York
by far more than any other commodity. They had carts running around New York City selling oysters on the half shell. They had New York oysters everywhere before pollution came.
Throughout the 19th century, New York City became the largest source of oysters worldwide. On any day in the late 19th century, 6 million oysters can be found on the barges tied up along the city's waterfront. Then it became even easier with the advent of the steam engine and industrial revolution. Oysters were being farmed for everyone. They were hauling out millions a day. But oyster popularity put an ever-increasing demand on wild oyster stocks. 1 billion oysters were eaten in 40 years, and the dredging and pollution killed the rest. This scarcity increased prices, converting them from their original role as a working-class food to their current role as an expensive delicacy.
You know, you would think that New York would have more of these places. We're surrounded by water, and we don't have that many oyster bars. It's just kind of odd. And we have the best waters in the world in Nova Scotia. You know, we have, between Maine and where you're going up north, we have just amazing amounts of places to get great oysters from. Yet New York, I would say, is slightly behind in all that. So it's kind of bizarre. The whole notion of shellfish has gone through a couple of permutations. The shellfish, sometimes the way it's perceived, it's just there's safety issues and all that sort of stuff. And so I think that the culinary world, it's our job to do a really better job at educating customers.
So when it comes to stuff like pollution, diseases, natural occurrences, whatever, too much rain dredges up pollution. So one of the most important things in America is to make sure that you're eating oysters from certified waters. Our policy at the Oyster Bar is not to serve any oysters from the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, and I personally would never even eat one. Okay, sorry.
So we decided to head to the heart of the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, New York isn't the only place in America where oysters have been hit hard. Louisiana, the mecca of oysters, was devastated by Hurricane Katrina, and they still haven't recovered. Hurricane Katrina was the deadliest and most destructive Atlantic tropical cyclone of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season. Approximately 40% of the oysters consumed by Americans comes from Louisiana, and about 2/3 of that harvest has either been significantly or catastrophically impacted. The storm surge caused substantial beach erosion, in some cases completely devastating coastal areas. The damage from Katrina forced the closure of 16 wildlife refuges. As a result, the hurricane affected the habitats of many species. Most of all, oysters. Jim Gosson is the chairman and founder of Louisiana Foods, a Houston-based seafood distributor that is the largest in all of Texas. Jim is afraid that unless Louisiana and Gulf Coast fishing communities are willing to change how they do business, the whole seafood industry could be lost.
For oysters, I think what it was is that the hurricane damaged the reefs, but that wasn't the big problem. I think the biggest problem was the demand for them, because after the hurricane, people wouldn't come in here to eat, and then of course then the oil spill comes.
The BP oil spill was considered the largest accidental marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry. Following the explosion and sinking of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, a seafloor oil gusher flowed for 87 days. Due to the month-long spill and the adverse effects from the response and cleanup activities, there was extensive damage to marine and wildlife habitats. Fishing and tourism industries were devastated, and human health problems have continued through 2013.
I don't know if you've heard, but the Louisiana oyster industry has kind of been through a lot. We've been through wars, we've been through hurricanes, we've been through droughts, we've been through a lot of freshwater kill, we've been through everything. We're gonna make it through this too. We're gonna have solutions. We're gonna come up with
Is this the worst you've seen it?
Oh yeah.
But we're in a community where it's all about the oyster and preserving it, and it's become more so with some of these crazy things that's happened in Louisiana in our lifetime. You know, Katrina, right after the storm, there was national media started saying it'd be generations before they'd ever see oyster beds, if they'd see them again. just out of left field. It was so inaccurate, but everyone heard that.
After Katrina, the access to getting them was, was cut in half. Even now, after the oil spill, we still don't have, half of what we can fish from.
On one hand, I think the oyster, it's almost like humans. I mean, it has an incredible capacity to survive and adapt. And, and our oysters certainly have been able to do that.
Despite the hardship for the oysters in the industry, the Shuckers, like the city and the people themselves, persevere. That as the storm passes, there is the hope of a great future ahead.
Our handful of Shuckers, it was 5 or 6 of them, were all adopted individuals outside of Louisiana. I mean, they're rock stars in this community. Sometimes they tend to be entertainers. And I said, I want you to be a professional. I want you to know the product. And we're blessed. We've got some of the nicest, more professional guys in this city that I get to work with, so we've been pretty fortunate.
The Louisiana oyster industry has had its ups and downs, and one family who has been through all of them is the Collins family. The Collins Oyster Company was the largest standing oyster company in all of Louisiana. But after the BP oil spill, they were forced to close their doors because of the lack of government help to get them back on their feet. So Jim took us over to meet the patriarch, Captain Wilbur Collins.
BP, I mean, they don't care if the fishermen are hurting. I mean, they're selling gas at $3 a gallon, $4 a gallon. They're making their money, but they don't care if my boat's been tied up because of the oil spill. The boat right there cost us $250,000. We put all our labor in it. I gotta use some of my savings to try to save it, to see if it's gonna get better. But nobody knows if it's gonna get better, but I'll give it a chance, give it a shot. No, I don't want to give up yet. There's no doubt you can go borrow money and keep on putting it in and pay back. There's no way. Unless you want to go borrow with the government, but we don't want to borrow with the government. That's a tough life.
What do you think about oyster shuckers?
A real oyster shucker, it's got a good skill because they don't have too many good ones. Go back in the old days, I mean, they had oyster shuckers that was unreal, and they loved to do what they do because it's all they knew how to do. But they had shuckers that could go to 40 sacks in one day.
There are over 100 oysters in a sack. That's a lot of shucking.
The shuckers at oyster bars, they're more almost like entertainers.
Yeah, they don't shuck plenty.
They're not shucking like 40 sacks.
They're not going to shuck no 40 sacks a day.
No.
Are these oyster shucking hands?
No.
Not too much, eh?
Put them back in its pocket.
You never went through your hand?
Oh yeah, I went to the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, didn't you just cut it the other day?
Oh yeah, I cut it the other day too.
How many sacks you shuck a day? 3 oysters or 3 sacks?
3 sacks maybe?
Yeah.
What he just said about the real shuckers, that's what I thought a real shucker is.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if the guys who are shucking in competitions, if
That's
it's more
different.
for their own ego and all
Yeah.
that stuff, and you just kind of validated everything that I've kind of underlined thought. But after doing the competition, it's fun.
Oh,
And
yeah, it's
great,
fun.
and it's great for oysters and to get other people involved in it.
Right.
But for me to take it seriously as some of the other shuckers do,
They would shuck 12 hours a day, too, some of
Yeah,
these people.
you couldn't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go to a shop, shuck 40 sack, go back home, feed your family, and next morning be back here and shuck another 40 sack, maybe for $10 a day. That was a shucker.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was some shuckers.
Captain Collins sent us to meet his son Nick to get a real taste of what it's like to be an oysterman in Louisiana.
So this is Catfish Lake we're going to. We're gonna use it to plant. We're like
next month or late next month, we're gonna start hauling out of here into our lease and then haul them all to Caminada Bay. And it's gonna cost us double than if we just sold them direct from here. But in expense, it'll cost us double, but we'll have that great oyster, great flavor, healthy, and try to get some of them sales back. It's rough now. It's hard to find oysters now. State Reef has nothing. The public grounds, the state grounds, there's nothing. There's no spat. There's no babies. There's nothing. So you kind of got to depend on your own wild growing leases. The east side, where the oil was affected even more than this side, there's nothing there. So thank God I got this side that's still productive a little bit. But I used to have 2 wild growing areas. Now I'm down to 1 in hopes that the other one comes back. Well, let's go see what we can catch. I'll show y'all how we find a reef. Just feel the bottom. No, you just feel the bottom. It's soft mud right here. You can hear them.
Oh, fuck. Nick is still hauling in oysters, but not at the rate he used to.
I mean, if this winter, if we don't have a great sale take, I mean, I'm gonna look for a job. And that's something I never thought I'd have to do. So where you turn, you're left with no other choice but to go to the oil field. You know, I'm at peace out here. I can kick back at the end of the day, throw my anchor, drink me a couple beers, maybe some rum, you know, like the pirates used to do. But, you know, you go work for the oil field, you can't do nothing. You need a hair sample, piss test, blood test, TWIC card, passport. I mean, I don't have to do none of that out here. I'm 40 years old. What the hell would I want to go start doing all that for? Go start at the bottom of a totem pole somewhere and work my way up. I'm a captain of a boat. I've got partial interest in 3 companies dealing with the oysters. And it's like, I got to throw all that away and go be a roustabout? Really? I don't think so, you know. Like Paul asked me one day, he says, Nick, what do you dream of at night? And I say, oysters. They're just such a unique animal that nobody understands, you know. And they're so good for so many things. I mean, there's so many things to me about an oyster that makes them what I want to do more than anything, you know.
Although oyster fishing has diminished, it has opened doors on new ways to farm oysters. Jules is one of those devoted farmers who is determined to get the industry back on its feet.
You see, these are wild oysters. They grow on the bottom. Yeah. These right here are about 3 weeks old, and these right here was 2 weeks old, but these were a little bit bigger. I'm gonna pull them out for you to look at them. This one right here will probably make about 10 barrels.
See that you'll be shucking and eating that in a year.
That's about 2 weeks old, these.
This is 3 weeks?
3 weeks.
From that to that in a week?
Oh, yeah.
It's really interesting to see. You think that's not a lot, but as they start growing,
I can see it's up high.
yeah. I mean, that's like a.
You made those in the oyster. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like 3 dozen.
Or more than that.
Yeah, that's just unreal.
But basically, what you want to do is have the water pump in from the bottom, and then every day or so he comes and rinses them off like this, stirs them with his hand, puts them back in. That way it eliminates all the sediment sitting on them. They don't choke. Because if you don't come clean them, they will die. Because the mud will just.
Well, what do they do in the wild?
In the wild, you have the current, the tide. You know, it goes in and out, and.
Every week they double in volume.
And they get to what, an inch?
They're about 3/4 to an inch.
When they don't fall through a half-by-half screen, then we can put them out in the wild.
When the spill killed all the oysters over here, I was buying oysters from all over. Over here, you got a good oyster taste that's in the back of your throat for 20 minutes after you eat the oyster. Whoever ends up buying these oysters are gonna be really satisfied.
We headed out to Jim and Jules' oyster lease to see if this new method of cultivating oysters actually works.
Nice. Oysters.
The high tide when they're salty. You must have 500 to 800 oysters in here, Jim. Easy. And they're all ready to sell. These oysters right here, I only had them 8 months. And they're already market size, so I see a future in it. And I'm game. Look how fat.
That good.
Look at the meat.
Boys. Wow.
Now go ahead and try it and tell me about the flavor. Don't taste it for the salt, taste it for the meat. Chew on it a little bit. Taste it for the meat, don't taste it for the, swallow it for the salt.
I just didn't know how much work it took to make this.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And forget the fact that you two guys decided that you wanted to put enough energy and time into doing it. That's crazy.
I ain't got nothing to do with my life. I love this. I love oysters. I love to eat them. They got a good taste. And when I don't have the food, I crave for it. And like I say, I've been eating them all over the world. And it's the flavor of this oyster that I need it. It's like a substance to me. Something I have to have. I'll do it till the day I die. What a 54-year-old man's gonna do anyway.
Before going home, Daniel wanted to test his skills against one of the best shuckers Louisiana had to offer, Leo. 3, 2, 1, shuck.
A little top. I have a brick.
You're getting there.
That one's a little dead.
Still going strong here.
Just put one up, okay? You guys don't want to eat one now.
There we go.
Good, they're good.
Hey, top 7, eh?
7 should be nice. Stop at 7.
Let's get on before the dawn. There's so much that we need to do. I've been dreaming about the same thing for years now, and I'm tired of lying awake.
The oyster industry, for it to continue to prosper, we need clean water, right? You can't have an oyster industry anywhere in the world without clean water.
I think that it will take, regulation, it will take a lot of things. It will take amazing oyster farmers. It's that caring, and it will be difficult, all around the world. But it's just going to make oysters even more special.
Mother Nature hasn't been dealing us a very good hand, if you will, with the oyster set in the wild and the traditional areas where those nice oysters come from. I don't know if it's something that's going to turn around. I'm hoping it does.
There aren't any more natural sets on the West Coast. The ocean acidification has gotten too much, so these oysters can't make shells anymore. This is happening because the glaciers are melting and all the carbon in them is just upwelling and making ocean acidification. So is this shades of things to come? We hope not, but we don't know for sure.
I think the only threat to oysters in terms of a long-term sustainability is if nobody keeps eating them anymore, then nobody's going to farm them, and then there'll be no more oysters, you know what I mean? But I think as long as there's a value placed on oysters and we can continue to make good oysters, then people will farm them, and then we'll have oysters forever.
Will the oyster stand it? Will the oyster stand to be expedited, twittered, flickered? Will it stand it? Will it hold its pressure? I think it will.
This is the 5th year for Oyster Fest. I think we have about 2,000, 2,500 people, so. Thank you, Daniel Notkin.
Watching all the competitions, at all the festivals, with all the craziness and excitement, the thing that I take away is the people. The farmers and the fishermen, the restaurateurs and distributors, and of course, the Shuckers.
Fourth is number 19.
I guess it's kind of funny that a guy who knew nothing about oysters was being asked to judge a shucking contest.
Let's hear it for protecting the oceans. Let's hear it for oysters for another 100 years. Let's hear it for Oyster Fest. Woo! We love you, Notkin. We love you more. Yeah!
So I'm just gonna rock out a bunch of mignonettes, that way all we gotta do is shuck.
Do you want to talk about perfect? That's a perfect oyster.
I'm starting to finally shuck like a shucker. I feel like my oysters are nice looking, and I'm proud of them. And I'm proud to bring these oysters to the table. And that's it. So you have two different types of oysters. You have Fortune Bays and Rodney's Prince. Ones are gonna be plump and more fresh tasting. These are the Rodney's Princes. They're gonna be a little saltier and briny. There's two muscles on an oyster. The abductor muscle. There's one here on the bottom, and then there's one on the top. You wanna cut that one. You wanna pop and lock it, like pop, pop, pop. Wow, careful now. This is your first oyster ever? Yeah? All right, let me know what you think. It's good? Perfect. This was a living creature. It's 3 years old in my hand. And it's beautiful and it's delicious. And I'm happy that I opened them, and I'm happy that they look that pretty. No, I love opening oysters. No, there's just no bullshit there. That's it.
You know, the best oyster I've ever had in my life was in El Salvador, surfing with Luke, smashing an oyster, you know, because there's guys in the water, like smashing stuff on rocks and eating it. I'm like, what the hell? I go over, and they've never used a knife. It doesn't even look like an oyster, it's a rock. And they're smashing it, and I eat it. It's salty, it's gross, it's almost unedible, but I'm like, this is the best oyster of my life.
Everybody in the dining world wants to sit at the chef's table. Rarely, if ever, people want to sit at an oyster bar because they think it's just a bar and a bartender's going to be there until they learn. Just last week I had people, same thing, we're booked solid, sorry, got a spot at the bar. Okay, we'll take it because it's 7:30 on a Friday. So I'm shucking oysters and carrying on with stories and oysters and not recognizing stuff, and here, try this and that, and they go, what's going on? I go, you know, who owns the place? I'm like, I do. And they, really? Oh my God. So they thought it was good, and they learned something. You have to teach them into things, and that's how they'll learn about the passion. And every time they end up listening to someone like myself or any excellent oyster shucker out there on the bar, watch the work, see how it comes up, and then listen to them talk about it, then they learn that there's this passion, and they too can take that with them, and off they go into the world.
The best definition of this came to me when I was serving oysters and a girl came up to the boat and she said, "What have you got?" And I said, "I have oysters." She said, let me see one. And I handed her an unopened oyster, and she started to fondle the thing. She said, "It's quite rough." I said, "Terribly rough, eh?" She says, "It's cold." Now she started to ask the right questions, right? Because she didn't look at it open, she looked at it unopened, because that's what it is. And then I opened it for her, and she started to feel the hinge and where the adductor muscle goes, and the bivalve seam, like the two seams and the cut, and then she started to squeeze the meat in her hands. And then she finally tasted the oyster liquor, or the blood of the oyster, you know, the juice, the seawater that's so sweet, salty, sweet. And then she put it in her mouth and she chewed it. And then she felt the inside of the shell, and she said, "That's fantastic." And that was the most sensational, sensual, appreciative moment. And the funny thing was, she was totally blind, and I didn't realize it.